Check one. Hello, everyone. Welcome. Just a safety announcement before we begin. Arts Research Center and also online. This is our first of our talk session as part of the symposium that's attached to Sonority's Festival Belfast. We have, in theory, 4 presentations today. The first one we're kicking off with James Werner, a former colleague of mine who sadly couldn't attend in person. He's sent through a video and he'll hopefully be available for the discussion at the end. So we're going to do just the presentations back to back and then save up your questions and discussions for the final part of the session. Great. So I guess we'll welcome Kurt, even though he's not here. Please join me in welcoming Kurt.
Hello, my name is Kurt James Werner, and this is my talk, New Developments in 1-Bit Sound Synthesis and Audio Effect Design. I'm a research engineer at Isotope in Cambridge. I'm a former assistant professor of audio at the Sonic Arts Research Center in Queen's University, Belfast, and I did my PhD at Stanford after an undergrad at UIUC in both music and engineering. So in this talk, I'm going to be describing something called 1-bit music, sometimes called PC beeper music or beeper music, has its origins in retro computing platforms like the Apple IIe and Sinclair ZX Spectrum. And the basic idea of these old video game systems and old computing systems was that they had a single CPU pin wired straight to a speaker. All it could do was go on or off, and that was the audio system. You can imagine this was an extreme restriction for music. It's worth studying because it led to some very interesting stuff. So to start with, I'll give you a few examples of 1-bit music from back in the day. This is the game Manic Miner from the Sinclair ZX Spectrum. Here's another piece from a few years later, the title music from Star Firebirds. If you pay attention to television, there was a show called Bandersnatch recently, well, not so recently, 2 years ago now on Netflix. It had a sort of Easter egg where you could find an old ZX Spectrum game, and that also used some audio in the 1-bit idiom. So since this is an academic conference, I just wanted to mention some good scholarly resources on 1-bit music before I dive into explaining my own approaches to composing in this idiom. Probably the best or most substantial, for sure, or resource out there is a book called Bits and Pieces, A History of Chiptunes by Kenneth McAlpine, because it's got a great chapter specifically on the history of one-bit music. And if you're in for something more bite-sized, he's also got articles that are available online. I highly recommend those. More recently, just came out in the inaugural issue of Sound and Music in Games, but there's an article called The One-Bit Instrument by Blake Troyes. This also similarly covers history of one-bit music, but something that's very nice about this is that he also takes a performer's perspective and describes his own one-bit instrument and some of the basic, more technical principles behind how one-bit audio synthesis works. So if you haven't checked this out, I would also highly recommend that. Just for some more context, this isn't just a musical idiom associated with old gaming. There's artists today still making one-bit music. I'll give you some short clips of some examples. After hearing some of these compelling or perhaps to a rare person not so compelling audio examples, I want to explain how one-bit music was made traditionally. The traditional way to make it was to explain exactly what the computer should do to each, to one particular address in memory, which would be addressing a pin on the CPU, which would be wired to the speaker. And this was very difficult because these old computers and old gaming systems had a very limited clock speed for the CPU, only a couple megahertz. They had very limited storage, so you had to write very terse code. And they also had very limited memory, so you couldn't store a lot of things in kind of the working memory of the computer. But people found a way around this. Today, we don't have quite so many restrictions, and you can do a lot of different things. So Tristan Parich, who I think it's fair to say that he's pretty famous for this album called the Bit Symphony. He would adopt a similar approach, but using a modern microcontroller. So this is from the liner notes of that album. He actually published some of the code. And so that's also the same approach that Blake Troyes uses. He actually uses his own microcontroller chips and has designed his own boards to interface those to speakers. So the purpose of this talk, not just to be rehashing what I think that Blake has talked about before and written about in your journal, the purpose of my talk is to describe my approach to making one-bit music. I'm interested in slightly different facets of it, and I've got some sound synthesis approaches which I think are novel, and those are what I'd like to share with you today. So as opposed to building my own microcontrollers or coding in an old retro computing platform, I actually do everything in a modern DAW. I use Ableton Live. And since in one-bit music it's nice to have things running at a high sample rate, I run everything at the highest sample rate I have. That's 96 kilohertz on my computer, or 192 kilohertz if I plug in my audio interface. I split up my conceptual thinking about the signal processing here into three groups. I have synthesizers, which make sound, so they take MIDI input and input from envelopes and parameter automation in the DAW, and they output mono one-bit sound. So although it's kind of a normal plugin and a normal synthesizer, it's outputting something which is strictly one bit. 0 and 1, no 1/2s, no stereo. None of the nice floating point numbers to make smooth waveforms. I also have audio effects that process sound. So they take in a mono one-bit input, just 0s and 1s, and they output a mono one-bit output. a different set of zeros and ones that have been affected in some way or another. And I'll describe some of the type of audio effects you can do in the 1-bit domain later. Then I also have mixers. Those do take in 2 channels, and they mix them together to produce an output channel. And this might seem silly because, after all, a lot of what's going on under the hood in a DAW is just mixing things, taking all the track outputs and mixing them, taking the output of buses and mixing them. But in the 1-bit context, this has to be programmed on its own because, as I'll explain in excruciating detail later, you can't just add signals in the 1-bit domain, because eventually you'll have a 1 and a 1, and since 1 plus 1 equals 2 and 2 doesn't exist, mixing signals requires special treatment. And under the hood, this is all, they're all custom plugins that I've written in the Max for Live environment. So that allows you to use the audio programming language Max MSP inside of Ableton Live. And then all the DSP is done 1 layer deeper in a programming environment called Gen. Gen is a little bit like Max MSP in that it's a data flow programming language, but it has a thing called Codebox that lets you write sort of C-like code. So it's a little bit similar to writing normal audio DSP rather than feeling like patching a synthesizer, which is what Max MSP feels like. And when I'm debugging and also just kind of enjoying what I've written, I have this raster scanner that I wrote also in Max MSP that takes the raw audio waveforms and prints them out to the screen. So it runs from bottom to top and then left to right. And that lets you kind of, with some kind of synchronization controls, that lets you visualize what's going on and helps me see whether my algorithms are doing what they should do. And it also just gives a nice kind of lo-fi visualization to what's going on. Finally, since you can't use normal audio effects in the 1-bit domain, I don't do any EQing or mastering or compression or any of the kind of normal things you do to clean up a track, but just for the extra retro flair, at the very end, I allow myself to use 1 normal audio plugin. I pump everything through a cool thing called Chip Crusher, which is a product made by Plogue in Montreal. All it does is it imitates the sound of the speaker of various old video game and computing hardware. So this lets you take an audio file and make it sound like it's been passed through the speaker of an old Apple IIe. Okay, so some difficulties with 1-bit music. The main difficulty is that addition doesn't exist in the 1-bit domain. If you have 2 audio files made of zeros and ones, you can't just add them because 1 plus 1 is 2. You also can't do other types of normal audio effects like filtering because since addition doesn't exist, linear time invariant operations like filtering and convolution also don't exist. Finally, another corollary of all this is that volume control doesn't exist, and you don't want to bust your ears or your speakers, so this leads to other difficulties. You can't just write pianissimo and have the music be quieter. You have to come up with some special approaches to making something sound quiet. So first, an example of some classic 1-bit timbres. Here's some square waves. Some basic 1-bit noise. And these are usually made with something called a linear feedback shift register, something that the Nintendo Entertainment System and a lot of old video game systems use as well to make their noise. Here's an example from the NES, a famous noise sound called the short noise that's used in the Quick Man stage of Mega Man 2. So even with these like primitive sounds, there's a lot you can do to add expression to the music. So you can take a normal, a little riff that's a little annoying as just a square wave. You can shape it with vibrato. Or by modulating the pulse width. You can take 1-bit noise, which might sound a little jarring or static over time. You can envelope the amount of downsampling so that it changes over time and gives you a sort of pseudo filter sweep. again, staying entirely in the 1-bit domain. So moving on to mixing, adding 1-bit signals is hard because 1 + 1 is 2, which doesn't exist. One approach is called the Xor Approach. If you notice, the truth table for addition is very, very similar to the truth table for the logical operation exclusive OR. So you can XOR 2 signals, and as long as you avoid the case 1 + 1 = 2, or 1 XOR 1 = 0, it's going to sound identical. So the way to do that is with sparse signals. A sparse signal would be like a square wave with a very thin pulse width. So that's why thin pulse waves are so common in 1-bit music. There's also a way called multiplexing the signals. You can switch back and forth between 2 signals very fast. This approach is nice because it can be used for non-sparse signals. This can be generalized by, rather than just switching back and forth every sample, spending a certain number of samples on one track and then a fewer number of samples on another track, which gives you this lopsided balance. If you want a 1-to-4 ratio between 2 sounds, it works pretty well. But if you want like 33-71 or something where some very fine detail with a large denominator in that ratio, you'll get very bad aliasing and it'll probably be unusable. Anecdotally, I think it's not good to set the denominator above 5 if you're using a normal audio sampling rate. You can also use this to do volume control, using essentially balancing the volume between silence and a track. That's some of the ways which I've been generalizing mixing in 1-bit music. There's a couple new types of timbres you can get from sound synthesis besides just square waves. One is this thing called velvet noise. And this is used in the audio signal processing research for artificial reverb and decorrelation, speech synthesis, etc. And it's basically a pulse train, a very sparse pulse train made out of pluses and minus ones, but mostly zeros. So essentially what's useful about this, and you can look up the article that I've written about this if you want all the technical details. What's nice about this is that you get a shelf-like spectrum whose cutoff frequency depends on the density of the pulses and whose attenuation depends on the relative proportion of +1s to -1s. If you use only +1s, you get the maximum possible attenuation. So this lets us make, in the 1-bit music domain, interesting shelf-filtered noise, which otherwise would be impossible, and lets us do kind of more varied percussion sounds in the 1-bit context. So in addition to giving us a new type of sound to work with, besides just bursts of white noise, this is a great advantage that it's sparse. Because it's this sparse pulse train where you only get very few ones compared to many, many, many zeros, the classic XOR trick for adding many layers of audio in the 1-bit domain works very nicely. So we get new timbre control, we get a new type of volume control, and we get a type of signal which is very amenable to being added together with classic 1-bit timbres. Next, I'll talk about some novel audio effects that I've designed. One is this so-called 1-bit resonant filter. So this is what a normal resonant filter does to a step response. You have an amount of resonance, and that's, as you increase the resonance, you get more and more wiggles as this filter oscillates, and you have a certain cutoff frequency for your resonant filter. The higher the cutoff frequency, the faster the wiggles. So my 1-bit version of this just oscillates a square wave back and forth whenever it sees a step. And it oscillates for a certain amount of time, serving as the resonance, and it oscillates at a certain rate, serving as the frequency. And the weird thing is that it turns out this kind of works. It doesn't sound exactly like a filter because filtering, again, does not exist in the 1-bit domain because linear time invariant operations do not exist, but this gives a convincing approximation, which I will demo now. There are other special kinds of filters that you can mimic, like a comb filter. Comb filters normally add a signal and delayed copy that signal. Again, we don't have addition, but if we replace that add with an XOR, it sort of works. It works better for sparse signals than non-sparse signals. You can even do feedback delay. A normal feedback delay takes a signal, throws it into a delay line, multiplying it by some number less than 1, and you get an echo. We can't multiply things by a number less than 1 because multiplication does not exist in the 1-bit domain. But we can do something that's like that. We can measure the pulse width of each pulse that reaches the feedback and reduce the pulse width by a little bit each time. and delay it. And then it replaced the addition with XORing. So you can imagine that if you had a pulse wave that was 8 samples wide, and then it hits this thing, each time it goes around, it's reduced by half. So then it's 4 samples, then it's 2 samples, then it's 1 sample. It gets a little bit quieter each time. Its timbre also changes a little bit each time, and it eventually disappears. It definitely doesn't sound exactly like an echo, but it's better than nothing, and it's a new tool that we can use for 1-bit music. So finally, I just wanted to show you a couple short demos of music that I've made using the techniques that I've described, some of these novel audio effects, mixers, and synths for 1-bit music. First, here's a little bit of Chopin. Here's some Liszt. And finally, a piece of music from a video game. This is a great game, if you haven't heard of it, called Return of the Obra Dinn. And the graphics are all rendered in 1-bit graphics. So I thought it might be fun to try to do a cover of some of the music in the 1-bit regime. And I've done a cover of it that is entirely 1-bit, uses a lot of the techniques I've described. It manages to coax 6 layers out of it: bass, a chord with chords of 3 notes, melody, and percussion. And it's mostly accomplished with this XOR mixing and crushed velvet noise approaches I described. Thank you for listening to my presentation, and I realized there was a lot of information there, so I'm very happy to answer any questions about 1-bit music.
Thank you, Kurt, who I think has joined us now on Zoom. Let's just check. Stop sharing. Is there a Kurt there? Yes, there's a Kurt there in theory. Kurt, can you hear us? So we're actually saving questions and discussion to the end, anyways. But hopefully, Kurt, you can hear us, and you can join us in the discussion at the end of this session. I'm not seeing or hearing you at the moment. Okay, so we're going to take a short change over here. Get set up for Adam Pultz Melbye next. So Adam, are you going to be over there, and I'm going to be over here? Yeah. Okay. Oh, Kurt, hello. I'll just say hi.
Yeah, I'm here.
Hey, Kurt. Nice to see you. Can you hear us? Nope.
Yeah, I'm just think I got the time delay because I was watching the stream.
Okay, so we're going to take a...
Oh, yeah, probably not to watch the stream and the Zoom at the same time. That's like a minute behind us. But some messing with time in unusual ways. But great to see you. We're gonna save questions and discussion for the end of the session. We actually have one less speaker than we planned in the session, so we'll have plenty of time to go into detail. So save your questions up for Kurt towards the end. But thank you.
Sounds good. Thanks.
So I'm just gonna pass over to Adam. So get you set up. First things first.
Is that good? Yeah.
You're near that speaker, so I'm just going to be cautious.
Oh yeah, okay.
Getting that in the stream, okay?
Hello, hello, hello.
Yeah, excellent.
Okay, good.
So, just reinforce a little there, and we are going to put this
Okay, we can actually just start on this slide.
Yeah.
Okay.
So, next up we have Pultz Melbye, who's normally based in Berlin, but also a PhD student here at the Sonic Arts Research Center. Please welcome Adam.
Thank you. Yes, so I'll be talking a bit about this instrument that has been my main occupation for the last 3 years. It's called the FAAB, or the Feedback Actuated Augmented Bass. And yeah, I've got, something that's back. Yeah, and I called the talk like an algorithmically resistant feedback actuated augmented bass. And in order to give context to why I'm playing this instrument and why I'm playing it the way I do, I need to talk a bit about how I got into music and playing double bass in the first place. And so when I was around 17 years old, I was a electric bass player playing in rock and funk bands, and I had recently gotten interested in jazz music and was considering playing a double bass, not really knowing what that entailed. But I got a tip that there was an instrument for sale at a music school not far from where I lived. And so my dad drove me there to look at this instrument. And as I said, I didn't know anything about double basses, so I could see like it looked like a double bass. It was made of wood, it had 4 strings, great. So we bought it and took it back home. It had been standing in this music school for like 30 years. And during that time, I guess it had been beaten around quite a lot. And so it's not this instrument. This is a different bass. I couldn't bring the other one. Sorry, I couldn't fly with 2 basses. But I would love to, I promise you, but no. So the bridge on this other instrument, my other bass, this thing, had gotten so super warped, and at the same time the strings had gotten like really high off the fingerboard, something like 1.72 centimeters. And 17-year-old me started playing this instrument, having lots of griefs, getting blisters all the time, but like letting the blisters pop, drying out, starting playing again, and eventually getting calluses and sort of starting to find some kind of voice on this unmanageable beast. And I didn't know about double basses. I lived in the woods. There was no double bass players around. So I thought that this was just like, that suffering was part of the whole thing about becoming a musician, a double bass player. And 4 years later, I entered the Academy of Music, and my teacher was like, "What are you doing? Haven't you heard about an amp?" For the first time, I knew about amps. I had one, but like he told me, you can just like lower the strings almost as much as you want, slap a pickup on it, and just start playing, and it'll be super easy. Just turn up the amp to get more volume. So I tried doing that. But at that point, I should show the action. Oh yeah, you can. I'm conducting Paul too. So this is sort of, it's still the acoustic bass I play today back home in Berlin is still the same bass that I bought back then. And I still have the same string height. So because at that point, like after 4 years of struggling with the instrument, I had sort of embodied the actual instrument into my own playing. I had formed this kind of relationship with this impossible beast. So when I started lowering the strings, I had this like disembodied feeling of something getting lost. I didn't feel the instrument vibrating as much against my body. I didn't feel like I couldn't get a hold of the strings. They were too low. There was all of these things that felt wrong to me, which seemed right to everyone else but me, of course. And especially like, so this kind of like resistance in the instrument that I had gotten used to went away, and when it got easier to play, I started feeling really uncomfortable, although I was able to execute all of these fast solos and doing fast walking bass that my teachers and everyone else sort of like expected a bass player to do. So at the same time that I had this jazz crisis, I could guess we could call it, and don't we all have a jazz crisis at one point in our lives? But so at that time, I started getting into more improvised and experimental music, and at that point, all of these things that were problematic about playing jazz on this instrument became qualities in improvising and playing experimental music, because sort of the resistance of the instrument allowed me to engage in a relationship with it where it felt like the instrument sort of kicked back at my musical intentions and forced me to navigate it in ways where I could explore new territory without the instrument just following along, but actually putting in its own, let's say in my interaction with it. And at the same time, some of these the nature of like very high strings on a double bass gives a very specific sound. And if you play this audio file, I think we can. So this is a recent recording from an album I made with the trio. And what happens when you have like strings really high from the fingerboard is like you get like these like rattly, noisy, they're not sweet double bass sounds. They're kind of a bit brutal, but there's also plenty of room for exploration of the timbre of the instrument. And so with this improvised experimental music, I was able to explore that whole pantheon of sounds that I found on my own instrument. Yeah, you can turn off the audio. It goes on for another 2 minutes. I think you got the idea of it. And so at this time, I started exploring much more what the double bass was about temporally and spectrally. And even though this is not the bass I developed that on, I can still sort of like try to give a bit of an idea. So just try to imagine that this is not equipped with all sorts of electronics. What I'm doing now is like this is all acoustic. There's nothing, no cheating going on at the moment. So it could, for example, be like. So like these like beat frequencies where like two pitches played close to each other cause another frequency to appear, another pitch to appear. It could be like multiphonics, that is a split tone where you cause the string to we cause like these like harmonics of the string to emerge. All of them are kind of weirdly unstable or metastable phenomena where you are in sort of an environment that is all the time changing and modulating. And I found great joy in exploring this kind of domain with this bass that sort of really allowed me to get into these kind of territories. So we can go to the next slide. So yeah, fast forward to 4 years ago, I was on tour in the UK with Paul, actually, and there I met, sort of by accident, this gentleman, Halldór Úlfarsson, who is the father of the Huldurophone that he's holding here. And the Huldurophone is a cello-like feedback instrument that he started designing 10 to 12 years ago. We can go to the next slide. So the principle behind the Huldurophone is that there's a speaker in the back of the instrument. That speaker is fed by an amplifier also inside the instrument, and the signal to that amplifier is coming from these electromagnetic pickups placed underneath the strings. What that does is that it causes the instrument to go into self-oscillation. The strings start resonating with themselves, and you get like this sort of like feedback drone instrument. Halldór and I, when we met, we started talking about what it would be like to do that to a double bass, to apply these principles to an acoustic double bass. So 3 years ago, we met in Halldór's studio in Athens, and we can go to the next slide. And Halldór did this. He cut an 8-inch hole in the back of a double bass we had purchased for that purpose. It wasn't my own bass. And we inserted a speaker into it, and that's what you can see here. So there's a speaker embedded in the back of the bass, just like with the Huldurophone. At the same time, we added pickups, electromagnetic pickups under. Yeah, we can actually go to the next one. Yes, so here you see electromagnetic pickups underneath the strings, and to our great delight, what happens when you then amplify that and turn it up is that you get feedback. And now, with this new instrument, I started getting the same sensation that I had with my good old acoustic bass, is that the instrument is sort of like, it enters into this like full vibrational mode. And that sort of fulfilled I guess, a dream maybe of many string players to have like infinite sustain. It also allowed me to, without bowing, because we are lazy. No, but it also allowed me to explore some of the things I talked about earlier, which is these, like, for example, beat frequencies. By letting one string resonate. So forth. This is great. It already felt great, but there's sort of one thing with feedback, which is that often it tends toward one stable state. Eventually it will settle in. If I turn off the instrument. So in a way, in some senses, there's a reduction of complexity with these feedback instruments. It tends to just end up on one single pitch, two pitches at the same time, if you're lucky. Now, we were quite clear, Halldór and I, when we started building this, that we would like to, well, no, I should say, like, the thing is, how do you counteract this? Well, that is, you can do that by, for example, digital signal processing. And so we were also talking about early on in our design process that we would like to include this on the instrument. And so there's a Bela, a microprocessor underneath the fingerboard, receiving the signals from the pickups. And what we can then do is, like, that could be a way of reducing this complexity, of enhancing complexity, let's say counteracting the reduction of complexity happening in the pure feedback loop. And there's many ways we can do this. One of them could be, for example, to equip it with some sort of like randomized algorithm that would sort of like continuously mess up the signal in order to make it never settle in a stable state. To me, like, randomization and these probability structures are not that interesting as an improviser, because it means that the instrument or the signal processing domain is not like situated in its own environment. It cannot really respond to input from a player, which is essential for me as a string instrument player. That's like engaging with this acoustic instrument. Like, there's always a sense of response happening, both me giving the instrument information, but also the instrument feeding back to me. So my solution has been, if we go to the next one, is sort of this DSP philosophy of trying to embed the signal processing in its actual environment, but also letting it respond, become aware of its own state. And that we can do by using audio features, listening to pitch and amplitude, and using that data to drive processing parameters. So what I'm doing here is that I let the algorithm, or like the algorithm listen to features of the audio signal coming in at its input from the pickups. and I use that to drive signal processes. But I also use the output of the processing itself, listening to the audio features of that and feeding that back into the signal processing. And when we're doing that, in addition to the feedback loop or the feedback happening in the instrument itself, we can go to the next slide, we get an additional sort of control signal feedback loop at the input by the instrument listening to its environment, or the algorithm listening to its environment, which in this case is often the strings, listening to the amplitude and pitch of the strings, and we can go to the next slide. But we get a third feedback loop as well, which is the algorithm sort of becoming aware of its own state. And in order to give that a bit more context, I would like to show two algorithms that I'm working with at the moment. We can go to the next slide. So the first one is like an amplitude synchronization algorithm that was inspired of me reading Stephen Strogat's great book on synchronization in nature and mechanical systems, biological systems, and so forth. And I was thinking about what would it be like if each string tried to synchronize itself to the mean amplitude of its two neighboring strings. So if we have this string, it'll try to synchronize to the mean amplitude of these two, this one, these two, and so forth. And this one would actually listen to this one and this one. So that could be a way of trying to make the instrument ring, like have all strings ring at the same volume all the time. That luckily never happens because I'm not interested in stability. It more like creates a kind of like dynamically involving sound environment. But I also didn't want it to make it too easy for the algorithm anyway, so we can go to the next slide. I give it a hearing disorder. So now the string is listening. It sort of doesn't hear the actual amplitude. It listens to the amplitude of its neighboring strings with a bias. That is, at first, it is a randomly generated bias, but then there's a evolutionary genetic algorithm evolving these biases based on a fitness function of how well the string is synchronizing to the two other strings, but also the strings, all four strings. And that sounds something like this. And now it starts synchronizing to silence, which it sometimes does. So as you can hear, it's quite sensitive. It just needs a little bit of input, and that will send all of the strings going again. And sometimes it will stay in that state for a really long time. Sometimes it will just go back to silence. But what it does is that it allows me to improvise with this instrument in a way where the behavior is like more or less deterministic. It's not random, but it's still highly complex, and I cannot like really control what's happening, because the moment I start bowing a string, the volume of that string goes down, and the volume of the other strings start going up. I don't know if you heard what I said because the instrument was so loud. When I start bowing a string, the volume goes down of that string goes down while the other strings go up. So forth. I'm just giving a little taste here. I'll be playing a solo concert on Saturday at the Handmade Music event. So the next algorithm, we can jump to the next one, is an adaptive comb filter. Kurt talked about comb filters. It's basically a delay line with a very short delay and a feedback. Here, again, like the algorithm is listening to itself, and what it does sounds something like this. So in this quite simple algorithm, there's already a lot of like negative and positive feedback loops, sometimes counteracting each other and reinforcing each other. And it also allows me to explore like a higher frequency range, because the bass in itself tends to be kind of like low frequency, but with this comb filter I get sort of resonances. See, doesn't do it right now. So with these algorithms, they're both very simple, but they allow for sort of an extended open-ended exploration, is my feeling at least of playing with them. And they afford for me, they afford this, like I'm able to extend the complexity of an acoustic instrument into an electroacoustic digital domain that allows me to, in a way, it creates this, an instrument that is already acoustically quite complex, receives, like, builds up a different kind of autonomy, we could say. It becomes semi-autonomous. It is suddenly able to respond in different, like, open-ended ways to my input. We can go. So that's like some of the takeaways of my research so far, having played with it over the last 3 years. And I should say, it's of course not just about these algorithms. It's about how they interact with an acoustic instrument. That's really important. It's a very, let's say it, they completely depend on the substrate in which they're operating. So all of this complexity is engendered by a relationship between a digital domain and an acoustic domain. But left on their own, they're often able to engage in sort of like complex extended behavior. They interfere and interact with the materiality of the instrument. I always said that. And this sense that there's like a spectral and harmonic rhythmic complexity involved that allows me to explore the instrument extensively. And they're resistant, and that means that to me, that the kind of having been brought up as a musician, jazz musician, where mastery and sort of like instrumental dominance was a totally cool thing to engage in, that becomes hugely problematized by this instrument because I cannot master it. It becomes much more of a conversation with me at the instrument where we will be responding to each other without me being able to sort of like pin it down and tell it what to do. And I think that's aesthetically interesting, potentially also politically interesting, I think, in terms of like what we have been brought up with in Western music practices, where we are taught to master musical pieces. And the fact that the algorithms are situated, they afford this interaction and improvisation. So that was my presentation. There's like a couple of references and resources if anyone is interested. Thank you.
Thank you, Adam. This thing's on? Yes. Great, so we're gonna have a short changeover. There's a couple seats left if people are looking for seats. There's one down in front. Maybe, there's some people leaving. We'll just have a short changeover, get set up for Olin and Canvas. So just be 1 minute.
Can I, is this, yep. I don't know if it's noisy.
That's fine. I think there's a mute button down here. If not, 1 second. Get you pinned on if you want to pin that on yourself.
Thank you.
Should I share this to start with?
Yeah, perfect.
And this full screen.
Can I switch this out then?
Yeah, just 1 second. That's down, that's cool.
And this? Will I just close it?
Yeah, if you can. If we just. You've got audio in there.
Yep. We just switch this camera.
Yeah,
Oh.
let's see. Let's see. If we can. Oh, might as well let her see again. Okay. Check, check. We're all good. Professional audio stream. What is that? Thea, can you hear us? Freya, even?
Freya?
Freya, even?
Hello?
Can't hear you.
Have we? She's muted.
Let's see. I think you're muted still. You want to unmute yourself? Freya, do you want to unmute yourself? Or? Freya, can you hear us? Thumbs up if you can hear us. Yes? Can you hear us?
Me?
Yeah.
There you go.
Sorry, I didn't know you were speaking to me.
Right. Excellent.
Perfect.
1 second.
Frey Edmonds. Yeah, aka Alvin Brandy.
Great. So thank you for your... Oh, 1 minute there. So we're just about to begin our next talk. This is a talk by the collective called Canvas. That collective containing members including Olin Monk, who's in the room with us today, and Freya Edmonds, aka Alvin Brandy, via Zoom. So please welcome them.
Hi everyone. My name's Olin Monk. I'm here today representing Canvas. Frey is joining me by Zoom. It was going to be Lou O'Neill, my partner in Canvas, but he can't make it because he's in transit, which is kind of fitting to this whole presentation. So instead we'll have Freya join at the end. Thank you to everyone for being here and to Paul for presenting.
Are you hearing me okay? You're there? Just 1 second.
Yo, yeah?
Yeah.
We good? Okay.
Got enough back there?
This presentation is a performed reenactment of an imagined version of a collective presentation by Canvas, as Olin Monk, Lou O'Neill and Alvin Brandy, a shared platform, record label and event series co-founded by myself and Lou O'Neill. The presentation was due to take place at Sonorities of the Sonic Arts Research Centre in April 2020. The entire festival was postponed due to COVID-19 related restrictions in travel and social gatherings. I'm here today representing myself and Lou's partnership, and unfortunately, as Lou can't join, we have, fortunately, Freya in his place. Canvas exists as an attempt to give collective agency to an increasingly dispersed community of artists. Established in 2014 as a series of performance events, Canvas has become a transnational fabric which connects individual practices and nodes of activity in contemporary music and live performance. As a community, Canvas is always expanding through new collaborations, alchemically creating lasting bonds which perforate boundaries between practices and people. This acts as resistance to the isolation implicit in the virtualization of contact through a solidarity between uprooted bards. By presenting the ideas which inform our continued efforts to work collectively as part of an ever-expanding community of artists or musicians, We hope to share some of our experience in attempting to find ways to collaborate, not just in creating music, but also in releasing recordings and hosting performance events. We hope to use this as an opportunity to openly consider some of our impetus for instigating and continuing this work in a context which allows feedback through open dialogue on the ideas behind the project outside of our continued practices of performance and release. This talk responds to the ideas of both feedback musicianship and the possibility of a record label as a vessel for new knowledge creation through sound. Earlier this year, I completed a practice-based PhD at the Faculty of Fine Art, University of Porto, by defending a thesis and portfolio of creative work under the title Wageness, Performing Alone and the Collective Body. Wageness is the almost untranslatable Irish concept of withoutness or away fromness. I've come to understand that this, in the Irish language and the culture around this language, implies a feeling of sadness not of being alone or lonely in a definitive sense, but in being away from a people or place. My research investigates the experience of performing alone as a solo act, the feeling of isolation that this produces away from the collective body of community, and the way that this affects continued creative practice and collaboration. I'll read from parts of a section of my thesis, which presents my involvement in our collective work as Canvas, under the subtitle Part 3, Movement, Disappearance, and the Collective Body. I hope that also some of Frey's interjections and disruptions will happen in maybe an planned and unplanned way, contributing in some way to the ongoing feedback of this project in its totality. To open with a quote by Herbert Marcuse from The Dialectic of Civilization, Eros on Civilization, a philosophical inquiry into Freud, first published in 1955, the closer the real possibility of liberating the individual from the constraints once justified by scarcity and immaturity, the greater the need for maintaining and streamlining these constraints, lest the established order of domination dissolve. Civilization has to defend itself against the spectre of a world which could be free. The people have to be kept in a state of permanent mobilization, internal and external. To continue this with a quote from Mark Fisher's Acid Communism, Unfinished Introduction, as published in 2018 in K-Punk, the collected and unpublished writings of Mark Fisher, edited by Darren Ambrose. Instead of seeking to overcome capital, we should focus on what capital must always obstruct, the collective capacity to produce, care, and enjoy. This presentation comes to exist as a written text, edited and presented by myself, but quoting heavily from ongoing dialogue between three of the people who would have taken part in this conference event if we could all be here simultaneously. It manifests here as a text which was written after the fact of the initial cancellation, drawing from source materials over the past few years of collectively executed practice and research processes. I've opened where Mark Fisher left off. At the time of Fisher's death in 2017, Acid Communism remained unpublished. As much as this book remains unfinished, this presentation has not happened as planned. The introduction to Acid Communism, itself an imagined sequel to Capitalist Realism, begins with the same sentences of Marcuse's Eros and Civilization, weaving through different points for this section of the text. The paragraph for which I've opened this discussion is in its complete form. This is where our shared script already deviates from Fisher's, the frame shifting towards other concerns. Instead of tackling privatization and choice, we instead focus on the effects of mobilization and non-succession. If there's a commonality between Fisher's unfinished introduction to Acid Communism and this presentation and discussion here today, it exists in the intention to research for ways through shared practice to focus on the collective capacity to produce, care, and enjoy. This essay is an attempt in some ways to address the processes of collectivization in music and our practices in an era of increasing isolation and individualism. It documents our efforts to reclaim communication as a process of community building in a context that runs the risk of reducing social bonds to commerce and networked connectivity. As a collectively executed research process and shared practice, Canvas lies in the forming of a community that is always in a state of becoming, and in the root of friendship as a relationship that extends to shared practice and experience. The collaborator is friend. This collective process began under a variant of this shared name in 2014 when some of us lived together in South London and began to host performance events locally, already displaced from our places of origin across Ireland and England. Through a commitment to a shared practice in a music and art context, which had brought us to the fringes of the City of London, a place of converging cultures, it was in the process of dispersal away from this shared moment of living together that our emergence as a collective somehow solidified. It was as if in reaction to our physical separation on further displacement, we continued to ground our co-constitution of a shared practice in friendship, despite our movement away from a geographic core at the root of our shared activities. Counterintuitively, mobilization became the bond that held us together as a collective. The events in London continued under different guises between 2014 and 2017. The final series being Court, which I hosted between 2016 and 2017 in an abandoned Coroner's Court in South London. By the end of 2017, a Canvas performance event was hosted in Berlin, where Lou had finally relocated, and myself and Elvin Brandy had begun to perform and record music together. We launched as a record label and event series in 2018, a moment when we were all living in different countries. The process, although initiated by myself and Lou, was very much a collective effort through which we released initially our own releases, establishing a statement of intent before opening the platform up to other voices. The next of these voices would be Elvin Brandy, whose Shelf Life we would release in early 2019 alongside the Cypher compilation, a project directed by Lou O'Neill, which would prove to be the most far-reaching and communicative of our releases to date, bring together 10 artists to respond to a theme and create a collective document to this process. With increased mobilization, our productivity also increased. Through this, we committed to opening the platform up beyond the hierarchical structures of succession by welcoming other voices to the collective. Later in 2019, we would release to Michael Spears' Extractin LP as a further collaboration with Daniel Martins of the design studio Alter, based in Porto, and our mastering engineer Ali Najafi of Ziggurat Sonics, based in Berlin. Each Canvas project is inherently a collective effort, and although there is a core group at the center of its operation, this is a permeable form, and we seek to involve new collaborators as much as building strong relationships through repeated collaborations. 2020 saw the release of 2 records from myself and Lou as co-founders, Love Dead 2020 and Ray Muniz, also 2020 by Lou, and the commissioning of a VA compilation, Apocryphy, co-directed with Elvin Brandy, and as our second compilation LP, alongside a further set of collaborative and solo releases currently in the process of being released. We followed with Lou's Erangel OST, the soundtrack to the film by Kevin Brennan, and Autolife, a new EP of songs which I released at the end of 2021. What do we currently do or intend to do with this shared practice? Is there a communal philosophy in play, actuated in practice? We hope so, and intend that this is collectively considered and forms the continuance of our shared platform. In doing this, we could locate a Canvas ethos beyond an ongoing production line in the form of a catalogue of releases towards a collaborative creation of a community of shared interests and a commitment to mutual care and support in our interwoven practices. To quote Elvin Brandy, aka Freya Edmonds, in her accompanying text to Shelf Life, released by Canvas in 2019, sickness unto death in an age of commodified well-being, approaching death from the point of view of an actualized virtual eternity. The commodification of daily life and the self preclude the possibility of reincarnation. We do not identify ourselves as a cycle, a movement, an expression of life itself, but as a single product that exists in and for itself. The supermarket social network obliterates the surface of material hybridizing, detaining all movement to self-enclosed unit reductions, excommunicating mutation. Encapsulated in a fixed identity, packaged and promoted, immune to the infection of outsiders. The social contract of a pre-sealed self branded with calculated sell-by date, sentenced to a shelf life of interpassive exchange. Shelf life compiles the synthetic axis upon which we bite out time smiling, interrupt user, authorize disk root conflict. What might appear to be a shared ethos in the intention of Elvin Brandy and Canvas's collective work is to disrupt without succession, to embrace movement as an undoing of the territorial fixation of identification and the disavowal of reduced unit selves, instead focusing on the forming of a collective body through a process of becoming that is always inherently and necessarily collaborative. The following text was written by Lou O'Neill to accompany the VA Cypher in 2019, in which we collaborated as a label with several artists to produce an inherently collective work. Lou O'Neill wrote the text as a director for the project, although the intentions were clearly to open up the work beyond the singularization of authorship or a singular directorial role. Cypher plays with different processes by which musical material is abstracted and codified. This project reconsiders the graphic score and other means by which music has been codified. Cypher considers the hegemony of authorship in the context of codification of music and speculates on possible means for musical propagation, whether they uphold human authorship or neglect it. In this sense, Lou led and assisted in collective creation. In many senses, it is the role of creation and direction which fluctuates most within the label, the roles of administration and formalization of procedures usually being shared between Lou and myself. This could change, but so far it's been like this. The intention here is not towards then a collective body in which all actors are the same, but one in which different roles are taken depending on the shared project and vision of the participants. It is not entirely clear or easy, any of this. Addressing the similarities and differences between individual and collective agency within a group with communal aims proves complicated and layered. We need more feedback, we need more voices, we need a healthy balance between consensus and dissent. Disrupt the self, find new ways to research for the collective flow. Here we reach the limit of the text. In any attempt at undoing authorship, we face the contradiction of writing towards disappearance. It leaves stones unturned, questions unanswered. In essence, a trace is left. What we're trying to do here is more about forming mutually supportive rather than independent practices. The desires which motivate our collective practice have been largely emergent. We may have started with an idea that working together might serve us better than working alone, but why and how to do this has largely only become apparent through the process itself. If myth is a form of collective belief in a past which informs the present, perhaps we are co-writing an alternative myth poem of shared and lived experience into existence. To quote David Burrows and Simon O'Sullivan in Fictioning, the myth functions of contemporary art and philosophy, published in 2019, for us then, mythopoesis names a particular kind of address to the future. As Deleuze puts it, there are art practices and presentations that are not necessarily for an audience already in place. But who exactly are the people called forth by mythopoesis? Mythopoesis involves a disruption of a more dominant fiction of the self. The concept of mythopoesis speaks to the multiplicity that would deterritorialize our usual identifications, or it speaks to the potential selves which we also are, whilst addressing us as part of a wider collectivity, as potentially part of a community to come. In resonance with Burrows and O'Sullivan's account of mythopoesis and as a practice of collective fictioning, Canvas exists as an attempt towards collaborative becoming through embracing activities that seek horizons in the unknown and the not yet of a shared imagination. It is a commitment to the practice of friendship, coming to be through shared experience. Basing a community on becoming rather than being allows dispersal not only through movement, but also of agency across an unfixed grouping of people. In this way, movement and flux are interlinked in that performer, audience, composer, artist, engineer, designer, and listener all become active roles. In this way, dispersal not only implies movement, but distribution. We are now and always remain at the outset of these aims.
Hello.
Yo, Frey.
Hello. Good evening.
Welcome.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Good.
So,
Do you have any, did you get that?
I did. Yeah. I was listening in. I was kind of in the middle of the studio session, so I was
What
jumping in.
are you doing?
We're kind of making like an album. I think that it's like oftentimes I've tried to make a pop song, and it always ends up sounding like this. But we're supposed to make a pop song.
How do I do this? Hello? Can we see you?
Do you want to close out the screen share?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right, bro.
Really?
We can't hear you.
Can't hear me.
Yeah, we're good.
Can't hear me. Maybe my microphone is very concentrated.
Sounds good.
Do you think it's only taking like the very close sounds? Can you hear
That's
the
cool.
speakers?
Yeah, we're good.
So we're kind of trying to mix like different aspects. We're in the countryside, so there's like, you know, we can make as much noise as we want. We've got like you know, some harmonicas, some kitchen elements, and many instruments. Yeah, I thought we'd play a little bit as a sort of
Yeah, go
into
play us out. I think I've said enough. So
in the soup. This is in the primordial soup. You know, this is like
that's what we want.
I can't explain what's happening, so it's kind of funny to present this maybe at a conference. This is like, you know, the pre-conceptual right now.
Go for it.
Straight onto the table of concepts.
What have we got, like 3 minutes?
Yeah, great. Yeah.
Yeah. Do you want to introduce your collaborator? Who are you with?
Oh yeah. This is Ronth. Incredible musician.
Cool.
This is also Haj, another incredible musician.
Great. Do you want to play us out?
Did he speak in French? Oh, I thought he speak.
Do you want to play us out?
Yeah.
Go.
Ensemble. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Yeah, always on wheat, because wheat is infinity. So you can only start at number 8. That should be a thing, really, not like after 3. You start at number 8 into the. On fait en performance. Sorry, I didn't keep my collaborators very up to date with the situation. You know, I thought it'd be all right, you know.
Any last sounds?
Last song. This is like trying to make a gabba track again. But...
Yeah, go. You're good. We can hear you. Yeah, we're not hearing your music. Just you when you speak.
But then we can hear the music when she speaks.
Oh, that's what's happening.
She needs to rap over it or something.
Just like, just give us a scream then.
Scream!
Yeah.
You want to scream?
Last
Sorry.
scream. Perfect. Thank you.
Trying to get as long as possible. It's a kind of a working mission. It's a sustained scream. But then there is an auto-tune. I wonder if you get that. It kind of sounds really nicely harmonized from my end. But maybe you just get the direct scream onto your computer.
That's all we got, yeah. Perfect.
Imagine that scream really like beautiful harmonic. That's how it sounds here in Lyon.
Thank you. Over and out.
Are we all done?
Check out Han.
It's okay.
You got it.
All right.
Thank you.
Round of applause for Olin and Freya. Thank you, Freya. Thank you.
It's been a pleasure.
Excellent. So
Dostar.
thanks for that very much. If you want to stick around for the discussion at the end, we have one more presenter from Brazil. We'll just get set up for Leandra. It'll just be a minute or two. Thank you all for your patience.
Oh, I still have this.
Yes. Okay. So first things first. Let's get you.
Okay.
Well, you put it on yourself.
Sorry. Trying to do something.
Sorry, everyone listening to the live stream. Sorry.
Yes, already start the noise.
Here you go.
Everything's okay.
Do you want to touch that too, or do you just put it on the desk? Either up to you.
Thank you.
And then are we playing anything from here, or?
In fact,
This is probably, let's see.
in fact, I think
Maybe better attached to your scarf.
yeah, you think
I
so?
think it's too far away.
Maybe here? No, it will not be good. I think maybe it will get a bit,
I think it's okay.
but that's okay.
You're okay? Yeah. Do you want this attached?
Yeah, in fact, the main thing I need to do with this is read some parts.
Okay, so you don't need
I
that-
don't.
you don't need that projector?
Yeah. I made the projection, but I think I will attend to listening.
I can easily
To
plug
speak
it in
in
for you
this.
if you want.
Maybe at the end. Yeah.
Okay.
I'll show some things at the end.
Yeah, so let's just plug it in. Is it just?
This is the adapter. I don't think it's the same.
So I think we'll go this one.
Oh, so it's better. I'm sure this is
Thunderbolt, hopefully. We'll find out.
okay.
Just give me 1 sec. Any chance? Kind of works.
But it's better to don't use it now.
Is there any sound or?
Can we unplug it and then unplug it?
Yeah.
It would be better
Okay.
because it's pretty chaotic.
It's there when you need it.
Yes, okay.
All
Well-
right. Great. Is this still coming through? Coming through? Yep. So please welcome our final presenter, Leandra Lambert. Yes?
Leandra Lambert.
All the way from Brazil.
Thank you. Yeah, one of the things I will talk about is about chance. And in the last weeks, I've been through lots of unexpected situations. And it's funny because I talk very positively about chance, but in the last few days, I'm craving for a bit of regular situation. It just happened one last unexpected situation just right when I was coming here. So it's intense, pretty intense these days. And I will talk about 3 projects I have, 3 solo projects. But they are solo projects that are only possible to exist after I have been in some improvisation groups. After I've been playing with some people improvising live, free improvisation. And the main theme was experimental processes and hybrid improvisation in 3 solo works: Cut Up Tragedy, Lorioni, and Lea Luxfera. But in fact, things changed a bit, and I will focus on the Cut Up Tragedy series. And it's the one that I've presented a performance yesterday at the Banana Block. So I'm really into it, especially because I think it's a project that depends on walking down the streets and in different cities and listening to the cities and listening to people living in the cities. And of course, I was not able to do it during the pandemic times. And I was living I am living now in Brazil in an area in the mountains, in the forest, in a small village. And with the pandemic times, this project was dead. Yeah. And I'm into it right now and started to do it in Belfast again. And, well, first things first. Today I will talk about these processes that I apply in 3 of my solo works. And first I will do a short presentation about each one of these, and then I will talk about some, I will also address some aspects that permeates the construction of these works, especially the political and conceptual approaches. In these works, I perform the entire production process from the initial improvisation and experimental process to the pre-master. The 3 of them also shares this experience, this experience of a hybrid improvisation. Live vocals over ghostly recorded voices and field recordings, corporal sounds with electronic devices, instruments, and programming. Cut Up Tragedy is a multiple nomad process project that experiments, transforms, and generates sound materials, images, words. It depends on 3 walks in a state of increasing unruling of the senses, collecting some fragments of the urban text, vestiges of bodies that pass by, cuts in space-time, the experience of a tragic time. It is about spaces expanded by temporal and phantasmal layers of memory and forgetfulness, places between the past, the moment, and future possibilities, passages between history and fiction. With the Lorioni project, I've started to seek shamanic and transformative experiences using singing and other vocal possibilities, electronics and various technologies, high, low, and do-it-yourself. Loops and drones, free improvisation programming, with intense real-time effects processing. I like to say that Lorioni is sonic witchcraft, made of songs in ruins, fragments of languages, lei, glosolalia, and noise. The compositions begin with free singing without concern for language. The result sometimes resembles known languages and later can generate lyrics arising from the sonority. Other layers are added, many of them generated from the voice itself, others with the use of altered field recordings, synthesizers, drum machine, bass, guitar, and the audio capture of magnetism, sonorities, and resonances from many sources. And from these 2 processes last year emerged a 3rd one that is a kind of synthesis of the previous practices, plus the creation of a performance persona called Lea Luxfera. In this is a bit more theatrical. And in this new work, I emphasize the character creation, the improvisation with poetical texts, and also the image experiments, with a taste for the non-conforming, the otherness, the alien, for everything that could be. And here comes the concept of I don't know exactly how I say, xenophilia, xenophilia. I don't know exactly how to pronounce it in English. I think it's xenophilia. And this is a concept that started to grow in the construction of my practices in the last years. So I'll start with it. There are some interpretations of this concept that are yes, conservative and simplistic, and also xenophobic. They try to identify this xenophilia as a despise for one's own culture, and if I totally disagree with this. So let's state about what kind of xenophilia I'm talking about. The main reference here for me would be Patricia Reed from the Laboratorium Cubonics and the Xenofeminist Manifest. I will read now the beginning of the Xenofeminist Manifest, written around, I think, 7 years ago, and a part of xenophilia and computational denaturalization, that was published at eFlux, I think less than 5 years ago. So I will read part of these two texts from Patricia Reed. Ours is a world in vertigo. It is a world that swarms with technological mediation, interlacing our daily lives with abstraction, virtuality, and complexity. XF, the abbreviation, constructs a feminism adapted to these realities, a feminism of unprecedented cunning, scale, and vision, a future in which the realization of gender justice and feminist emancipation contribute to a universalist politics assembled from the needs of every human, cutting across race, ability, economic standing, and geographic position. No more futureless repetition and on the treadmill of capital. No more submission to the drudgery of labor, productive and reproductive alike. No more reification of the given masked as critic. Our future requires depetrification. XF is not a bid for revolution, but a wager on the long game of history, demanding imagination, dexterity, and persistence. And then the other text excerpt. Today, we seem caught in routines of changeless change, with innovation largely monopolized by shareholders or confined to solutionist false promises, because our conceptual models have been calcified by what is. There are powerful interests invested in sustaining what is. These conceptual battles are also quite obviously long-term political ones. Nonetheless, since substantial, enduring transformation is enabled at this conceptual level, plotting who we are, where we stand, who, what composes a we, and how we understand coexistence, humble first steps need to be taken. This movement marks an affirmative labor in deontologizing that which is given, leveraging a chasm between what is and what could be. To transform these conceptions of givenness as a necessary, albeit always provisional myth, is to intervene in the world on a diagrammatic plane, both because of the potent nexus between ideality, materiality, and reality, and because of our ability to grasp and be grasped by concepts. Concepts remodel us as much as we model them. End of quote. So here there are many core concepts for me, and one of them is the importance that Patricia Reed gives to what could be. And this conceptualization by Patricia Reed helps me to organize and think what I've been doing these days. But in fact, in some way, I was experimenting with this in my works since the beginning of the last decade, when I started some works applying what I started to call methodology. That's a methodology based on odology, in the ways that we trace by chance, mostly by chance and by experimenting the space, the place. And this is a main part of the process of construction in the Cut Up Tragedy series. And I will read something I wrote about this a few years ago. And one of the essential movements in my artistic practice is walking, and walking in this state of deep listening. And now I came with this concept by Paulinho Oliveiros. And by bringing these two movements together, the relation between the body and the environment is felt to be altered and intensified. Walking in a state of deep listening results in no longer being in the environment, but being the environment, really being part of it. Walking turns into wandering. There is no point of arrival, no defined route. I experience layers of space-time that overlap and contaminate one another, senses that mingle. So this wandering can turn any place into a labyrinth that has no end, as it opens in networks that expand and generate other labyrinthine courses. In this process, a third essential gesture emerges to fable. To trace a route is also to draft a drawing and a narrative. So one of the things I do in those strolls around the cities is to take notes of things I see in the walls, things I see happening in the streets, what people are saying, and I take notes and I create a mix of fiction and document about the place. And I took many notes here in Belfast, and I went to the so-called Peace Wall and took some notes there. And this brought me back one of the issues that arrived when I started to practice these strolls, this methodology, this odological, practicing this odological space, and this kind of, it seems so free, yeah, you know, like you walk in down the streets as you like, guided by sounds. It sounds fun, it sounds so free. And in fact, it is, but you usually, especially being a woman, you usually find some impediments, some boundaries, some borders that you can't trespass. Yeah? Sometimes it can be not safe to go to some places. And when I did the walk here in Belfast, the initial point was here, yeah? And I went by foot to arrive to the Peace Wall, and in fact it was very difficult to find a way, because Google Maps said it would be like a 40-minute walk, and it was more than a 2-hour walk, because I saw at least 2 barriers in the city that were not easy to trespass. The train line, it was tricky to find a way to get over the train line. It was like very hidden, and then like a freeway. Motorway, yeah. A lot of cars everywhere, and you have a roundabout. It was very tricky to find my way there too, without knowing the city. And I was talking to some people yesterday that, yeah, it was built to separate people. It was really built, in fact, to separate people in the city. And of course, when I arrived near the Peace Wall, it was crazy because I felt like I was getting into a prison. You had these huge walls and barbed wires and there's this small street that you pass by. It was not what I was expecting. Yeah, I didn't. I was not prepared to it. I was a bit more. I don't know. I was much more focused in how happy I was that I could be doing this walk here after the worst part of the pandemic times. I think we are in the tail of the pandemic times. At least I had 3 shots of vaccine. So, and I was impacted by the reality, the political reality of this. And I changed it a bit what I was going to talk about here, because I was going to focus more on like the hybrid improvisation process, how I use my voice improvising alone with the machines, you know, doing loops and using loops and delays and all sorts of sound effects. But I think it's more interesting to talk a bit about this specific experience here. And I brought back a bit of this. Let me run. I have only 3 minutes, so go to the end of it. Yeah, and one thing that I usually hear when I talk about this work is it safe for a woman to do this? And it's strange because why the responsibility for safeness is so commonly put upon the possible victim and not over the potential aggressor. What's a safe space, literally a safe space? In this kind of assumptions, what is meant to be regulated, controlled, and subjected is once again the female body and the breadth of women's experience and their expression in the context of public space and society. So there is a gendered allocation of space, and here I will read a small quote from Ferzaneh Milani, writing about Shirin Neshat's work. Gendered allocation of space, however, has a sweeping relevance, and the desire to limit woman's space is not peculiar to one culture or another. Sanctified by notions of beauty, desirability, safety, morality, or religion, many cultures have restricted women's mobility. So there is this historical control, desire to control and regulate. The bodies seemed as feminine as woman bodies. And by this personal experience, I got into this questioning about this supposed nomadic freedom. Does it really exist? Who has this freedom? Is freedom of movement widespread? Is the right to come and go the same for everyone? Obviously not. To cross the same imaginary line, a border, often established by war, by a violent imposition, and by economic dominance, it is enough to be on opposite sides to have radically different situations. Nationality, skin color, ethnicity, gender, social class. Each one of these markers will weight as one more difference when crossing a border. A white American and an indigenous Mexican will face absolutely unequal situations before the same borderline instituted by power. Thus, when one praises nomadism, when one speaks of how mobility has become a planetary social rule, and the nomadic artist is a virtually iconic figure in today's art, one must always ask, who is entitled to all these various relatively free transits and movements? Which people and which artists can actually be part of all this emancipating nomadism? In fact, this type of libertarian mobility can only be exercised by very few, based on the aforementioned markers. Well, then it's a bit strange to bring back this in this moment after the worst part of the pandemics, because we all had to stay a lot with no mobility. But in fact, when we started to exercise this right to move around, I feel that these markers are waiting more again. In Brazil, and I think in the whole world, the situation of women during the pandemics went pretty worse. Many of them lost jobs and had all the care work. They get overwhelmed by all the care work of family, and it's not free in the end. Well, I had much more to talk about this, but I think it will be. I will write it and put in the online. And I like to finish with these questions that they were yesterday at the performance too, with music and so on, but they can be here too. And what defines a border? How can we undo a border? Is it possible to have peace and freedom without social justice? And there is one I saw among all these people that was writing love and peace and union. There was this guy or this girl, I don't know, this person who written, "The future is behind us, dudes." And so I would like to finish with this answer. Is the future behind us? Thank you.
Thank you, Leandra. Thank you. How's everybody doing? Just checking in. So we have time for about 15 minutes for discussion and questions. I just realized that microphone's off. Yeah, just back again. So about 15 minutes for discussion and questions. Can I invite the presenters that are here in person to join Leandra up here in the front? So Adam, you want to get this side? Maybe all and grab a chair. And we've got Kurt on Zoom. No, you can leave that there. You can.
Okay.
Let's go back to the iMac. Voila, Kurt. Let's see. This is going to be slightly tricky with microphones in the room, but we'll do our best. Kurt, you should be able to hear us okay, is that right?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Yeah, I'll just make you big. Window, enter full screen mode, yeah. Great. And I don't know who you can see, we've got this webcam, so now can you see the audience there, Kurt? Wave if you can see us. Great. And can we hear you? Are you still there?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Okay, great, perfect. So I'll just put that back and forth. Right, so there's a lot of information there, some really interesting, very diverse talks. But I'm going to open first with questions from the audience for any of our four presenters. Does anybody have anything they would like to kick us off with? Yeah. So I'll pass the mic. Just introduce yourself and take it away.
Hi, Kurt. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. My name is Abhiram. I'm a PhD student here at SARC. Thanks for the nice presentation. I was not aware of most of the things with, especially recent developments with one-bit synthesis. My question to you is, so I remember you said multiplication in the one-bit domain is not possible, but isn't multiplication just an AND gate?
All right, let me think about this for a second. Isn't multiplication just an AND gate? Multiplication is an AND gate, yes, but you can only multiply by 0 and 1, so you can only turn things on and off.
I see. So you're saying when there are ternary, when you have non-binary numbers, you can't really multiply them. Okay.
Yeah, like if you've got a square wave synthesizer in a normal context and you want to reduce its volume, you can multiply it by 0.5, 0.1. So if you like dictionary of allowable levels is just 0 and 1, all you can do with multiplication is be at full volume or completely off.
Yeah, sorry.
But nothing in between.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, sorry, got you there. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Eddie. Other questions from the audience? I have a ton if you guys don't have anything to say. We'll go with Pedro here.
Hi, Pedro Bello, Director of SARC here. Question for Kirk. First of all, thanks so much for bringing me back to Manic Miner. Spent many hours on it, on the Spectrum. So I enjoyed reliving that. Quick question for Adam. I was intrigued by your hearing disorder implementation. And I was wondering whether there's an attempt there. So you're obviously fascinated by the state of decay of your first instrument and how it accumulated these, I guess, disorders, you could call them, that you then embraced and then became your practice. I wonder if the hearing disorder is an attempt to achieve some of that. You mentioned there's a genetic algorithm, so presumably the disorder develops in some way. Is there a direct attempt to emulate in the algorithm domain this degradation of the instrument and this decay?
Yes, so I think it always happens. I think it's okay. It's gone. Yeah, I think. Let me think. It's not like I'm not trying to directly emulate the acoustic instrument. It's more like the behavior I'm fascinated with, and it's something I think that first occurred to me a year ago while working on this instrument. Why is it that I like it? And I was like, oh yeah, it's actually because I'm obsessed with this kind of like behavior in the acoustic instrument as well, and that kind of like turned on the, like I kind of like realized that's actually it. So it wasn't like a conscious desire to emulate the acoustic instrument as such. It was more a realization that there was more fundamental, you could call it, I guess, my kink regarding resistant instruments or like this kind of behavior. And with the genetic algorithm was sort of something I just started. I didn't have like a master plan with it, but it is sort of trying to evolve these biases so that the instrument will synchronize with itself. But because I'm
also playing with it. So I'm constantly changing the environment that it's trying to adapt to. So I mean, maybe if I left it on without playing it, it maybe would develop some kind of master synchronization. But since I'm playing with it, it's always trying to catch up with me, and I'm catching up with it. So it's not an attempt to evolve to some higher state. And I mean, that's anyway probably not a feature of evolution as we see it. It's not trying to reach the highest point. It's trying to reach something that is sort of good enough, right? That's like, I guess how Stuart Kaufman would see evolution at least. So it's more like generating some complex behavior that can change over time. I don't know if that answered your question.
Great, thank you. Any other burning? We got one in the back, and then one further up. So maybe you could come here so we can see you a bit.
Hi, Adam. Yeah. Thank you very much for your research. I think it's quite interesting. I like it. But my question is, why do you call it a new instrument and not a double bass modified? I mean, I'm thinking about the prepared piano. It's not a different instrument. It's a piano that is prepared. What will be the difference in saying, okay, this is a new instrument, or this is a double bass that I am modifying to achieve something conceptually? No.
Yeah, that makes me wonder, is the prepared piano actually a piano only because it looks like a piano? I mean, because it sounds so different, right? If I heard Cage's prepared piano pieces, not knowing what the title was, I'm not always sure I would be aware that it actually was a piano at all. So with this, is it a new instrument? It's a good question. The thing is, there's a lot of technology embedded on it, but instruments are always, I guess, in a state of flux, even though we consider the double bass, the acoustic double bass, sort of a fixed instrument. But there's still developments going on. So maybe in a way, yeah. I need to think about it more as well.
So there's just a hand up there. Yeah. Go you, and I'm jump in next. Keep thinking of questions.
Hi, another question for Adam. I'm sort of curious as to whether, when you were talking about the kind of resistance to mastery of the instrument, you know, to what extent can the adaptive processes sort of defy you? You know, can it run away with you when you're playing it on stage? You know, can you be sort of defeated by it, or is it always within, you know, in terms of probabilistic kind of computation? Can you is there an absence of philosophical contingency in the instrument, or can it actually some musical event? Can it exhibit some behaviour that you wouldn't predict?
I think that was also something that the cyberneticist William Ross Ashby was thinking about in the 50s. Can you design something that sort of like transcends your own intention? I guess like that would be. I do think that there is some emergent behavior on this instrument that I can't always predict, and especially with designing these algorithms, it's very rare I have a master plan about what they will do. It's more like I make something and then something else happens. Then I didn't predict the synchronization algorithm to actually not synchronize. It was an attempt to make it synchronize. Then something else happens, and then I respond to that. That's on the design level. On the performance level, yes, of course, it's always within a certain boundary that I have set as the designer. But then there are also processes where I'm like genuinely surprised, and on stage I also do sometimes feel a bit defeated because it will sort of like enter some kind of very deep, stable state that I didn't predict it to do, and it can maybe stay there for a minute, and I'm kind of like just left out of all the fun. So, but of course not entirely unpredictable. Yeah.
Great. So I've been thinking about all four of these presentations together, and for me, there's lots of unexpected and some more obvious connections. Like, definitely want to ask you both about nomadism and your practices, which is a lovely tension there. But I think there's one thing for me that kind of connects all of them, possibly, or at least in some way, is the idea of constraint. So with Kurt, you've put this on yourself. 1 + 1 = 2 for all the rest of us, but not for you. But there's some beauty in working with that constraint. Obviously with Adam, you talk about the physical resistance of the instrument and the constraint in your broken jazz bass, and then that motivating further constraints that kind of resist mastery or control. Obviously Canvas is born of the like constraints about distance and working together while being apart. There's that type of thing. Obviously constraints as well. You talk about the constraints that come with certain identities or realities, like of gender, of class, moving across borders. I'm just curious to get maybe each of you to elaborate briefly on how you think about constraint, or if you even think about it, and both as a restrictive but also potentially an enabling feature in your work. So maybe we could start with Kurt.
Sure. Well, I think you hit the nail on the head that my topic is totally about constraints, and I got into this topic because I was interested in chiptunes music, and I had enjoyed like using trackers and doing kind of 8-bit music in the past, and there's kind of a so as a researcher, my main work is about virtual analog modeling and like making high quality models of analog circuits and high quality reverbs and stable time varying systems, kind of a very mathy, very clean DSP stuff. So I kind of got into this 1-bit stuff because I wanted to, work on something that was less clean and more grungy. It wasn't about like trying to make a perfect emulation of a low pass filter that, has zero noise and, perfectly matches a Neve console or whatever. And I think also what attracts me to it is that when you have constraints on your way of working, you come up with things that you never would have come up with other ways. Like, if you're just trying to change the volume of a sound, if you're playing a saxophone, you just blow less hard. If you're playing the synthesizer, you just twist the volume knob down. It's normally something you can control very easily. So I really enjoy like figuring out how to solve these little problems, and like, the volume control in this 1-bit synthesizer just sounds like totally bonkers because you have to go about it in such a abstract, strange way that, it gives it its own character. Whereas, twisting the volume knob on another synthesizer, maybe it's like the part of playing that synthesizer that has the least character or no character.
Great. Thanks, Kurt. Maybe let's see if I can move this over here so you can see some of our other people. Yeah. Olin, I'm curious about constraint within your work and the work of Canvas, like this idea of wagness and away fromness and apartness, which seems to be a feature of that group's collaboration at this stage and through the recent ongoing pandemic. I wonder if you could talk a bit about how you think about constraint, but also, I guess, ideas about collaboration and solo practice as well.
Thank you. Thanks, Paul. Yeah, I think it's interesting that you've brought this up as like a kind of something which isn't present in each talk, because I think maybe it is one link which is maybe generative in some ways. This idea that constraints, in some ways, it's a reason to start trying to do something. A lot of times, attempt maybe comes through this limitations in many ways can be creative opportunities. I think for us, one of the main things here, I said I would do something that I would never do, which is present a collective project alone in some ways. So having Freya join in some ways is like, although chaotic and maybe unplanned in many ways, hopefully undoes some of kind of this limited constraint of being present somewhere, and how that often is served to define performance practices, and maybe trying to undo some of that maybe kind of traditional ideas of conviction or presence as the defining maybe defining definitions of performance which are based on presence and conviction and certainty. And for me, collaborative practices is one way of kind of opening that up. I'm also interested maybe in terms of linking that with the kind of question on nomadism, because listening to you speak about nomadism, I thought, okay, yeah, this is kind of coming at a similar problem from, in some ways, I don't think a different angle, but actually maybe speaking about or exposing it in another way. Because I think in some ways there's more commonality to what we're doing, and in some ways it's then how you choose to address that question. So that was great to hear, because I think in some ways when you try to do anything, what you do is you face the limitations of what it is and how you can maybe explore something conceptually, practically, and how that's always a limitation in itself.
Thanks, Leandra. Do you have any particular thoughts on constraints and limitations and
Yes,
working with boundaries and those kind of conditions?
Yeah, in fact, I think that these constraints, this kind of constraints I was talking about here, they give me more exactly the sense of collective, the sense of being part of this, of a specific groups, you know. It pushes me from my solipsist, my subjectivity, more, you know, what I am imagining, what I'm trying to do, and it pushes me to the ground and to who I am, to what groups I'm in fact attached, and sometimes we forget this. At least I forget sometimes, because I have this I don't know, this free imagination that goes and a bit I can be excessively dreamy sometimes, you know, and this kind of thing of constraint works in this way. To me, it brings me back to earth and to political realities.
That's great. I think that also connects, obviously, possibly to some of how you're approaching the bass. You mentioned this, Adam, as well, as not just an aesthetic, but a political move. And maybe you could talk a little bit about that to finish us off, and how that connects with constraint within your practice.
Well, I'll try to end on not a too dark note, but I think it's thinking about constraints. Like we humans aren't very good at that, really, and especially, I mean, in the present day and age, like living in a capitalist society where we are basically used to consume ourselves out of problems and relying on techno-solutionism to solve it, like thinking that you can fly green, for example. You're seeing that in all the airports now, and it's completely ridiculous, right? There is no such thing as flying green. Like there's no such, like fossil fuels can't be green. And so even if there would be in 200 years, like now is the time to start really thinking about constraints and how to, well, and as Don Haraway talks about, staying with the trouble, we need to we need to get used to living in a very different way if we don't want to end up in an even worse place where we are. But we also need to get used to living in like very difficult times, and how to, and I guess that's also what you speak a lot about, creating communities. And that's very hopeful work, or gives one hope that there are these initiatives, and we have to see how we can make that work, I think, in a world where we can't fly all over the place and travel all over the place. That was a dark note anyway. Maybe someone can end on a light.
No, it ended on hope.
Mark Fisher and Donna Harvey.
Working with constraint to ground ourselves and to the reality, the materiality of our existence, and work within the constraints to find ways to connect. You know?
Stay with the trouble.
Stay with the trouble. Went on our way. Thank you all very much for your patience. We'll end there. Thank you. Please thank our speakers. Thank you all for watching online. Unfortunately, you can't join us for the wine reception, but everybody else, wine reception next door. Live stream, we'll be back for the concert in the Sonic Lab in about an hour. Thank you.
I was in fact afraid of flying this time.
Yeah.
Because I was thinking in all the... in everything.